we will go ahead and get started. First thing, thank y'all for speaking with us today and letting us know about stuff. Y'all can just look at me the whole time. Don't worry, it's like cameras.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess the first thing we wanted to ask y'all about was tell us a little bit about your family history. Where did the Spains come from? Granny, where did your family come from?
My family was raised right there where I was born. My mother was. My daddy was raised in Arkansas, but he had an uncle that was married to my grandmother's sister, and that's how Daddy got to the Arcadia area. And then that's where he met my mother. My mother was walking down the road, and Daddy was in a wagon with his uncle, and he saw my mother, and he said, "I'm going to marry that woman." He knew her exactly 3 weeks, and they were married, and they had a successful marriage. And as far as I know, they were happy. I never knew any different. So, but then they produced me for your popo, I guess. I don't know. He seems to think that anyway. Okay, Popo.
Well, my family came from Italy to England to Ireland and to across to the States. Our Spain name was originally D Spain and had in the front of it. But when it'd be my great grandfather, when he came, he took the D off. And so my daddy was born here in Wise County, just right across the field from where Uncle Ed lives. And then my mother, on her side of the family, her daddy was from England. He came from England. Her mother was from Germany. And my grandfather, Ryle, he died at an early age. He was only 38. But my grandmother then raised, I'd have to think how many, 5 or 6 children, my mother being the youngest one. And my mother had surrendered her life to go to China as a missionary. But her mother didn't allow it. She said no. So shortly after that, she met your Papa Spain, and they were married. And I had an older sister. She's gone on to heaven, and there was almost 7 years between her and I. And then there was 7 of us children. And for how that Granny and I met, we were both working at Swift's packing
He
plant.
said he winked at me, but that's not right.
And I just saw her from here up, and I just thought, well, if the rest of her looks like that, I sure would love to see her. So it just worked around, and the providence of God, we've often talked about it. Her from where she was, where I was from, it would have been an almost impossibility. But Granny and I never did date very much. I don't know if we had 3 or 4 dates together. Our courtship was by mail. And we knew, I think we met in November and we married in March. And of course, that's the rest of that story.
So tell me a little bit about, because how old are each of y'all now?
I'm 88.
And I'm 86.
Okay. So tell me about what it was like growing up, because obviously now is a lot different than it was back then. Tell me about, you went to, going to school, what that was like. Some people had to leave school to go work on a farm. Tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up.
Well, we had a happy childhood. We had to work hard. I always said that my daddy wanted us in the field with him. It wasn't anything but shaking Bermuda grass. But we worked hard. I started school when I was 5 years old. I had to walk about a mile and a half to school with my brothers, and then the next year they transferred us. They closed that school and transferred us to another one. Since this one didn't have the high first, well, then I had to take the first grade over, and then I graduated from high school at age 16. Now, I didn't get a scholarship or anything like that. I didn't try, but I made my grades and I did graduate. And then whenever I stayed at home, and I kept my brother and sister while my mother was working at the shell plant at Minden, Louisiana, helped finance some needs that we had as kids. And my daddy was a very hard worker, very hard. He was slow, but he worked hard. And we always had enough to eat. We had a lot of mornings for breakfast. We'd have fried chicken and biscuit and gravy. Nothing like it. It's wonderful. Might want to try it sometime. But there was always plenty on the table. And I don't know, when we was growing up, it seemed like a lot of hobos come through our area. And my daddy was the type that he would take them in, and they'd spend the night with us. And Daddy would see that they got fed real good. And I know one night, one of them almost died. Daddy had to go to town and get the sheriff's department to come out there. And the next day at school, I was crying. And I wouldn't tell nobody what I was crying about. But that's what it was, that Daddy had to go through that. And it just broke my heart. But Daddy was that type that he saw that people's needs in that manner was met. And then we had during the World War II, the maneuvers. The boys out of South Louisiana was maneuvering in our area. And it was so much fun. I'd get out there on the porch and sit and wave at those boys. And we lived at a crossroads. And there was always an MP at that crossroads to direct them which direction to go. But it was fun. I had a good childhood. It was hard, but if it's to do over, I'd work even harder and take more off of my mother and Daddy. They lived to be a ripe old age. Daddy was 75 and Mama was 87.
Your dad was 85.
85, 85. He was 9 years older than my mother. But he loved my mama. And Mama and Daddy had 9 children. They was only able to raise 6 of us. My mother's first baby was born dead. And then she had another one that lived 3 hours. And then another one that was 11 months and almost a year old, 11 months and 15 days, I think. He had double pneumonia, but he was sweetie. He was so smart, really a smart child. And so, we all just loved him to death. It was hard to give him up, but the Lord knows best, and he took him at that age. I was standing by his bed when he passed away, and my mother was sitting on the edge of the bed with her hand on him when but you think about my parents, how hard it was on them to give up three babies. And I heard my daddy's tale about how hard it was to get money together to get the casket for the second one that passed away. You all probably didn't know that. That is, we know what it is to give up a loved one like that. And Papa and me has been very fortunate. We had the three boys. They were just wonderful, wonderful boys. You just asked your mother. She'll find out I had wonderful boys.
Well, Papa, tell me about your childhood.
Well, I had a wonderful childhood. Of course, I had loving parents, and they too worked hard. And back in the days of our rise coming up, we didn't know we were poor. It had just a way of life, and we entertained ourselves. Papa trained 3 roping horses, and I roped some in my early teens, and then I worked hard, worked in the field, and I knew that that it was my responsibility, and I thank God that I was taught work ethics and brought us. And then, of course, I graduated from high school at 16. I had no clue what I wanted to do or what, and I really didn't seek the Lord's will. And then between the time I was out of school, that's whenever I was working in Fort Worth and staying with one of my uncles that lived there. And of course, the school that I went to growing up was across the pasture. I started school in September before I was 5, and at the country school. Of course, back then they'd start them whenever they wanted to, and then when I finished the 7th grade, we had to go into here to Decatur to school, and had walk or whatever. And they finally, the old Decatur Baptist College that was here had a bus that they were running out of Bridgeport, and I'd walk across the field and catch that bus coming into school. And when I was saved when I was 15, and I immediately I knew that the Lord was dealing with me about something I did not know what it was. So instead of really seeking the Lord's will, I kindly went in the opposite direction. But during that time was when Granny came into my life, and of course,
and all they thought about then was getting married.
Ed came along, and of course we grew up with him. We was both so young whenever when Ed was born. And when I was 21, that's whenever we surrendered our lives to the Lord. That's been 68 years ago. 68 and a half now. 65. We've been married 68. And of course, I look back over my life and how that the Lord has so blessed and so directed it. Mother, as she mentioned the 3 boys, what a blessing that they've been to us all these years. And then, of course, as some precious people came into their lives, and through that we have you grandchildren that we love with all of our hearts. And great grandchildren, which we love with all of our heart. And my prayer is that as the boys have taught our grandchildren, my prayer is that our grandchildren will do the same, teach their children to love the Lord. And, whenever this life is over and it's all gone and we all get to heaven, we can only imagine what it's going to be like. And all these years, your papa has preached, and I still love to preach. I told Granny I haven't preached in a good while. I didn't know how it was going to be, but I really got a thrill out of preaching these 3 times. So that is that's about the substance of our life. My parents, they took us to church and exposed us to the gospel. And that, as I made mention a while ago, when I was saved, Granny Spain, my mother, was sick most of her life until all of us children were gone. My older sister is the one that raised us, and primarily, and taught us to work. She made me wash dry dishes, and I told Granny when we got married, don't ever ask me to dry dishes, because I had
You won't even put them in the dishwasher.
I had all I wanted. So
y'all have gone through World War II, which is unlike anything we've seen today.
no.
My generation certainly hasn't seen anything like that. Tell me what it was like going through World War II and fighting the Germans and the rationing of everything. Tell me what that was like.
Well, we got stamps for gasoline.
How old were y'all first off when?
Whenever the war broke out, I was 16.
What was that?
And Granny would have been 15. I never went to World War II. When it came time that we had to draft back then, and whenever I went for my examination, my blood pressure was high. So they rejected me, and so I spent. It was tough, but people were gladly. Nobody grumbled about having to get us down. They were patriotic. Our boys was prayed for, and of course, Granny's brother was captured at the Belgium Bulge. He spent about 6 months in a German prison, very cruel to him, and his feet froze, and but we gladly did what we did. See, all the boys that I went to school with was drafted at the same time I was. They all went. And if I hadn't went when they would have went, I would have been in the Bataan March. That's where they went through they were Japanese prisoners. And the Japanese were very, very cruel to those that had been captured. And but we worked hard, and we had a wonderful president at that time. That I heard the declaration of war.
I remember where I was at when Roosevelt came on the air declaring war on Germany and Japan. I was in the study hall in Ruston High School. It was a nightmare, but it had to be. We were attacked, so we had to defend ourselves.
And then whenever he had declared war, then he prayed and asked God to give us the victory. We had no defense. We only had very few ships, but he turned the war over to General Eisenhower and to General MacArthur, and General MacArthur was in the South Pacific, and it was there whenever they had to take him out of the island of Bataan, and whenever he stepped on the ship, he just said to the soldiers,
Old soldiers never died, they just fade away.
He said, I will return. And he marched. He was the one that took the surrender of the Japanese emperor on the battleship Missouri. And those are days that our country you kids will never know it like we knew it.
Never.
When a dollar was worth a dollar. And we didn't have one, but if we had one, it'd buy something. When Granny and I married, our church only paid us $15 a week.
And we paid our rent.
We paid our rent, which was $35. So we didn't have, but Granny would spend maybe $10 or $12 for enough groceries for us to eat for the week. And milk was a quarter, 25 cents a quart. And sometimes we didn't have a quarter, but somehow the Lord always provided for us.
Let me tell this.
Okay.
That we had a man in the church, our first pastor was at Jacksboro. We had a man in the church that tried to give Uncle Ed a quarter. He wouldn't take it. He said, my daddy has plenty of money. And we were just thinking, take that, take it. But he wouldn't take it. My daddy has plenty of money. But this is funny for Ed. There was a snow cone stand that was just around the corner from our house. Well, Miss Bain kept Uncle Ed while Papa was in school and I was working Bible school. And I was working. Well, Pawpaw would take Uncle Ed to the store, and he taught him just charge it, cause Mr. Spain paid his grocery bill by the month, I suppose. But anyway, he'd tell his uncle said, or his brother-in-law said, whatever Ed gets, said just put it on my bill. So he grew up charging it. Still does. But anyway, he would get on his tricycle and ride around the corner and go get a snow cone. And he'd tell that man, just charge it. And so one day, Papa was over there, and that man told him how much he owed for snow cones. And he said, how come I owe you for snow cones? He said, well, you don't have to pay it if you don't want to, said your son. Said he was so cute riding over here on his tricycle and asking for a snow cone and said, charge it. But you know what? We never saw snow cone on his mouth. Never had any idea that he was doing any such thing. But anyway, it wasn't long till that precious man got killed. There was some cattle rustlers in the neighborhood, and he knew too much. And his body was found weeks later, went it out in a pasture, and it was just eat up with magnets.
Well, on kind of a lighter note, as far as chores, I know that y'all probably think kids today have it ridiculously easy compared to the chores y'all had to do when y'all were little. When you were little, what did your mom and dads have y'all do for chores?
Well, you know that we had the slop jar by the bedside. Well, it was our chore to take the slop jar out.
What is a slop jar?
It's a pea pot. It's a pea pot.
Where people use bathroom in it.
Yeah. Well, I've got one out here on the shed. You must see it. I
hope it's been clean.
You must see it so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, we'd have to take it out and then pour some water in it, rinse it, and let it drain. And then at nighttime, then we brought it back in. And then my sister and I, another chore we had was to bring in the stove wood. We didn't bring in the firewood. My older brothers did that. But the stove wood, because my mother cooked on a wood cook stove. That's all we had back then. And finally, she was able to get a kerosene stove, and that stopped the carrying the wood. Kept Daddy from cutting any more stove wood, but he had to cut firewood. And of course, we'd pick cotton. I drove the team of mules while Daddy and my brothers pulled the corn, and I would have to, whenever they had cut hay, they didn't have balers then. We had the big old barns had a loft in it, and I would get up in that barn, and as Daddy would throw the hay in, I'd grab it and take it to the back of the barn, and so that we'd have plenty of room to store all the hay that Daddy would need to feed the cows and the mules through the winter time. Now, a lot of people had horses. We had mules. And they, of course, I'd been gone from home a long time before the first one ever died. Well, Daddy was going to do away with the second one. And you know what my mama said? No, you're not. You're going to keep that mule and you're going to feed it till it dies. And it raised these kids. And you're going to take care of that mule. So that Daddy did. He took care of that mule till it died. And I guess that's about all the chores, and like working in the field by Daddy's side and doing whatever we could. I stripped ribbon cane so Daddy could make syrup. And your papa will tell you today that my daddy made the best syrup of anybody. Ribbon cane syrup. Now you can't imagine that, can you? He had this thing, Papa probably describe it better than I can, and it was pulled with the mules, pulled round and round, and he would stick those cane stalks through something looked like that. It'd squeeze the juice out, and it'd run into a vat.
It had 3 big cylinders and it had a cog on it, and all three of them turned the same way, and you'd put that ribbon cane in there, and then there was a spout where the juice run into the vat that where he cooked off the syrup. Well, my chores, of course, my daddy, if he wasn't in the field at sunup, sometimes it was too dark to see, but we was on our way to the field, and we didn't leave till it was just about dark. And we hoed corn, we hoed cotton, and we picked cotton, and I've had pulled corn and bale hay and milk cows, and one of my main jobs was whenever we got in, Dad had put the horses in the barn, and he always soaked his corn. Well, you had to get that corn out of that water and throw it in there. I remember one time I reached in to get corn, and here was this big old rat in that in that barrel where the corn was soaked. And then I got busy playing one night, and it's time to go to bed. And my daddy said, "Son, you forgot something." And I knew immediately, and it's dark. And he said, "Go turn them on." I started, but about the time I got there, there's a pack of dogs was running a wolf, a fox. And they run right between me and that, and I let out a bloody scream, and my daddy ran out there. And so from then on, I turned the horses out of the barn at the time that before dark. But I had to carry in wood. Daddy always hired somebody to cut the wood. They'd cut it for $1 a rick, and so he always hired that wood cut. Dad didn't like to do it, and neither did I. I have done some of it with a cross-cut saw, and so that's about it, Cody.
Okay, Courtney's got a few here that I'm going to ask, but I wanted to ask y'all one first before I forget it. But y'all talked about how the Lord has just blessed y'all so much through the course of your life, and you feel like you've grown in your love for the Lord, and I guess the process of sanctification. Tell me what that was like. From, you said at 21 you decided to get in the ministry, and so tell me what life as a Christian, now you're both in your mid-80s, from where you were to where you are. Tell me what the Christian walk has been like for y'all.
Well, of course, we were both young, and we grew together. Your love for the Lord is like, I guess the best way to describe it is like the love for one another. Only it's not a fleshly love, but it's a heart love. You come to a place that you can trust the Lord with things that whenever we were young, it would scare me. But as we just walked with the Lord and followed my verse of scripture that I've always used, Cody, in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding, but in all thy ways acknowledge him. And here's the verse: and he will direct your path. So yes, we grew together. We've been in the ministry together. We've just grown, of course, to love each other. I love Granny whenever we married, but I really didn't know the kind of love I know now, because it's like if you become familiar with the Lord, knowing you've got His promises that He made to us, and whenever you learn to just step by step, you learn to trust Him and follow Him, and you learn to pray and get His direction. You depend on the Holy Spirit to do His work in your life. And so I've come down to this place. I told Granny the other day, we were talking, I said, I have zero regrets that we didn't give 150% of ourselves in the Lord's work. If I could call back, I would do one thing. I would have spent more time with the boys.
I would see to it that he did.
But it was back in those days, well, we had to work hard. We didn't have, if you had a church, you had to build one. You had to win souls to do it.
But may I say this, he was taught if he wasn't out there knocking doors nearly 24 hours a day, he's backslidden. And so he was out knocking doors, trying to win souls. And I tell people, the boys are mine. I raised them. And that's what he was referring to. He would take more time and be with the boys than what he did. But he was doing what he thought was the right thing. But, the Lord doesn't expect you to neglect your family. That's part of.
I was always there at mealtime, and I prayed with them, but there would just been things I would have done with them different. But as far as I know, I don't guess they'd have to answer that question as to whether they feel they were neglected. I know Ed.
They weren't neglecting.
I know Ed, when he was in school, graduating, the counselor was telling him what to do. And there was one of the boys that had surrendered to be a preacher. And he was a Presbyterian, and he was going to...
His first baby.
he was going to school, and the counselor said, "Why do you want to do that?" Said, "You'll never have anything." And your Uncle Ed made this statement. He stood up and he said, "I beg your pardon. I've been raised in a parsonage, and I don't think I missed anything." So your family is so important, and they've always been so important to me. And you don't know till now how wonderful it is just to get to spend this little bit of time with y'all today.
Ministry is not all that easy. You have your ups and downs. You have your friends. But we made it a practice that we never got real close to anybody. You've got people that you're close to, all right, but we tried not to ever get too close, because usually in the ministry you get too close to somebody and a lot of times they'll turn on you. And we've seen that over and over again. So we tried to avoid that. We had people we could depend on. And we'd call on them. But for us really spending a lot of time with them, we didn't. And that was a big factor in I think it helped us in many ways. Just like we were on this trip, we heard about Noah. It's another preacher. It got too close just recently to someone. What do you think? They're gone. And this happens over and over again. So we made that a practice, that the people knew we loved them and were grateful for them. But for us getting real close and have that, let that tie show, we did not.
If you were to ask us, would we give our lives again as we have, we would say yes. I wouldn't take anything for it. And of course, just like this phone call I got was from a boy that I had great influence in his life. So, all right, what else you got?
Well, and before I forget this one, also real quick, how a little bit about each of your testimonies. I know you said 15, and then 21 was, I guess, whenever y'all surrendered. But specifically, your testimony, how it came about, how the Lord convicted you of sin, and
Okay.
how did you come to that point in your life to accept Jesus?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was 15 years old and was in a summer revival there in the Methodist church. That was, if I remember right, it was in August. I think this was the regular time of the year that they had their revival. And that's whenever I was saved. Yes, I was sprinkled. But was I christened as a baby? No. My mother did not believe in that.
How old were you?
15.
Okay, that's right. You just said.
15. And then I was baptized in the Fundamental Baptist Church here in Decatur. Back it was about, probably in 48, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably.
In that time. But no, my mother did not believe in christening. But let me go back to the church. We just lived a mile from the church, and Daddy would hook up those mules, and we'd go in the wagon. And the preacher every Sunday would go home with Mom and Daddy. And this one time, Mama would often laugh about it. The preacher was sitting on the, what do they call that, springboard? Is it springboard?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the mules took off, and he was sitting in a chair, and the chair turned over. Mama just thought that was so funny that that preacher turned over in that chair. But it was, but they always went to our house for Sunday dinner. I can remember that. Of course, they liked Mama's cooking, and they knew there'd be plenty. Mama was a good cook.
Well, I was working in wheat harvest whenever I really got so convicted. I was only 15, and we had to sleep on the ground, and we hauled the wheat. We'd go out and get it out of the shocks, throw it on the wagon, throw it into the hopper of the separator. And whenever night would come, I couldn't sleep. And I was so convicted, and I would lay there and I'd beg God to save me. I didn't know all I needed to do was just trust Him. But I really was convicted. Well, I went home, or my daddy come got me on Saturday. They shut the thrashing machine down at noon, and he came and got me. And he knew that I was under conviction. And so my mother was in the hospital. Didn't expect her to live. And Dad had already he had made arrangements. He was going to keep me and my older sister, and other members of the family was taking the rest of the children. And I felt so bad that I thought I was going to lose my mother. Well, it come time to go to church. We always had church on Saturday night. Well, it come time to go, and Dad, my older sister, had got us ready, and of course I had to get myself ready by then. But I told Dad, I said, no, I don't believe I'll go. And he said, yeah, you're going. And so we went by to see my mother, and then we went on to church. Well, I was convicted, and Dad went with me, my daddy. And I remember the prayer that my daddy prayed by my side. And he said, oh God, don't let my son be deceived. And so the preacher showed me in the scripture that if I'd just call on God and trust him. And so that's when the burden of my heart rolled away.
Okay, so kind of moving on to a new topic here. Tell me about some of the issues when y'all were kids that you may have gotten in trouble. Mom and Dad got on to you for doing something. Can you think of an instance or two?
I can think of one right quick. We had some people coming to visit us, and I guess I was 12 or 13. Well, we had lanterns for light.
Did you not have electricity?
No. We didn't have electricity until Granny and I, after Granny and I married. And anyway.
You need a pen, a paper.
I grabbed one of those lanterns, and I made about 3 rounds all the way around the house, like a wild Indian. Well, I come around the corner, my dad reached out and got me. And one of the worst whippings I ever got, because it scared him, and he was afraid that that the lantern, if I'd have dropped it, why, man, Dad whipped me. He didn't whip me many times, but I sure remember that one.
I remember one time that I was whipping my sister. She was 2 years, Aunt Mabel. I don't know what she did to me, but I had my hand on a switch, and I was really giving her a good one. And Mama come out somehow. I don't know if she heard Aunt Mabel screaming or what, but she said, bring that switch and come here. Well, I threw it down and took off running. And my older brother, Uncle Byron, was standing there, and she told Byron to go catch me. Well, he didn't catch me. I just stopped. And then, boy, did I get a whipping. And but I remember that. But I was giving Aunt Mabel a good one, too. She and I used to fight a lot, but then we loved each other. And, of course, my brothers, they fought, but they loved each other. Just like these boys, they fought, but they loved each other. Nobody fought them. They had all 3 of them.
Did y'all want to take a break, get something to drink? And then
I better run to the bathroom.
It's funny.
Well, they wanted on fast.
Come on, you might want to forget that.
He does. If you'd have seen him.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Or I guess continue. Cortney wanted to know. Tell me about argument that y'all had?
I'll be glad to. Man, it almost caused a divorce. Paul decided that he wanted some shrimp that was in the shell. And I told him I was not fixing it.
Wasn't that
So he
oyster?
goes and buys it anyway. I didn't
Wasn't
fix
that
them.
oysters?
Or maybe it was oysters, whatever. I told him I wouldn't fix them, and I didn't fix them. Well, it created a real problem. I mean, it was a heated argument. And Uncle Ed knew about it. Even after we'd got up, gone to bed, got up and was sitting down in front of the heater, still going at it. Ed come in, sat down by us. So we kind of cooled it a little while, but he knew that Mother and Daddy was having a serious problem. I mean, he was just, how old was he? It's about, well, this is when we was in Dumas. I remember very well. And, well, so the others was here. But anyway, Ed was very well aware that Mother and Daddy had some serious problems. All over some stinking oysters. If he hadn't thought he's going to make me fix them, it wouldn't have happened. But if I tell you I'll do something, I'll do it. If I tell you I won't, I won't. It's just that way.
Okay, so tell me about your first date. When, if you can remember roughly when it was, the year maybe, and what y'all did.
Well, we married in 45.
November.
We married, it had to be in 44 then.
Yeah.
I don't know where we even went.
Did we go? I think our first date, we went to hear J. Frank Norris preach. It was on a Sunday night, I think. That was our first date. We went to that huge auditorium. I never will forget it. It was like 4,000 people there. At the First Baptist Church in Fort Worth.
It's not that large now.
How did he approach you? How did Papa approach you to ask you out on a date?
I don't even remember that. I know one time he asked me for a date, and I was living with a girlfriend of mine, and he asked me for a date, and I had planned to go over to my brothers and sister-in-laws that night. Well, what I didn't know when I refused him is that he already had asked another girl for a date. So when I asked him, he asked me, and I said, no, I'm going to my brother and sister-in-laws. Well, can't I go with you? And I said, no. And so...
And I don't think we'd had a date at that time.
We had been together a couple of times. But anyway,
Okay.
he went on with brown eyes. And then I had no more than hit the Swift's plant the next morning. Somebody told me that he went with brown eyes the night before. So he was following me, and I turned to him, I know what you did last night. And he denied it. He denied it to the last. And then he finally said he did. But he never did ask Brown Eyes for another date after that. But anyway, Brown Eyes and me was on a break at the same time. And she had heard that I was mad. And she just said, I wouldn't go with anybody if I couldn't go with somebody better than Clyde Spain. I never said a word because I knew she'd been with him the night before. And I never opened my head. Well, of course I didn't. That wasn't what she wanted. She wanted an argument, but I just never opened my head. But he never asked Brown Eyes for another date.
See, after Granny did that, I knew I had her because she was so upset because of that. And I
Well,
thought,
the
okay.
idea asking me for a date when he had a date.
You knew who I wanted.
I didn't want you, though.
I know you didn't, but you know who I did.
There was some dummy there that was from Decatur that was walking up the. We'd been on a break, and he and I was walking together, and he said, "There's no more nice girls left." He shouldn't have said that to me. I told him, I said, "There is some nice girls left, and I'm one of them." He never opened his head again.
When y'all were little, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
I had thought about being a nurse, and I got married and got to be nursemaid. Been nursemaid ever since. See, I have to nurse this one. What did you think you wanted to be?
It's always in the back of my mind of being a preacher, but I didn't know what. I really had my. I mentioned a little bit ago. I don't think it's on the camera, but I trained 3 roping horses. And back then we didn't have the RCA or PC, or none of that. You just, it was kind of like winning a jackpot. But I was really, from the time I was 20 years old, I had, it was in the back of my mind that that's what the Lord had for my life. But it was difficult for me to really surrender to it. It was a hard fight.
Well, we almost lost Ed before he surrendered.
But it was, I really had in my mind to be a rancher. Was what that was what I really wanted to do. But
And the people back where I grew up, they thought I had married a rancher. He was everything but a rancher. You know what that dude was telling our pastor before he surrendered to preach? That if he
be
surrendered
careful
to
with
preach,
the language you use. Calling me a dude.
that's what you are, dude. Dude, did you get the message? Anyway, he was telling our pastor that if he surrendered to preach, I'd leave him. And it had been 10 years ago that he told me about that. And I said, well, I'm sorry I disappointed you. Yeah, he told Brother Jack Powers, is his name, that if he surrendered to preach, I'd leave.
That just
He was careful not to tell me that.
What was the first car each of you owned?
first one I had was a 1937 Chevy. A Ford Coupe.
I don't know what the first
That's
one.
what we had. That's what I had when we married.
We didn't ever have 2 cars till we moved to Dallas, did we?
Uh,
Think so.
well, no.
Well, we did for the boys,
Yeah, they
They
had
had cars.
cars. They had.
but I didn't.
I don't know. Glenn didn't have one whenever we was in Roswell, did
No.
you?
He wasn't driving. Yeah, I guess he was.
Yeah, he was driving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was driving. No, they didn't have one. I guess Ed had one to go to work
Yeah, Ed had a car.
and drive. Yeah, because he run off the road one day and he said that he went to sleep.
No, he blacked out.
That's what he told the officer. He blacked out. I think it's something attracted, got his attention on the side of the road.
Okay. What do y'all remember of the Great Depression?
Okay, I remember the rationing. We got stamps to buy sugar. We got stamps to buy gasoline. And I remember that
Now that's back during the war, huh?
that's during the war, but the Depression was still going on. I remember during the depth of the Depression, my dad hired our team out to the government. They did road work. As WPA, they called it. And he got $1 a day for them. And I'd go with them. And I remember two guys that stood all day. One of them had a big, heavy sledgehammer, and the other one had one. And they had a rock about as big as the end of this table here. And that's all they did. Till late in the afternoon, they stood and they'd hit that rock. And they'd hit it, and one of them hit it, and the other one would hit it, and then the other one would hit it. And I said to one of them, I said, this looks stupid to me, you guys standing here hammering on that rock. I said, there's no crack in it nowhere. And I never will forget what he said. He said, son, this rock is splitting from the inside out. And those guys worked for like 35 cents an hour. And that was when that's when the welfare, as we know it today, that was the beginning of it. It was the beginning of socialism, even though President Roosevelt was a great leader and he had this socialistic program that he began. That's the beginning of it, and we've watched it progress over that. I guess the thing that I remember about the Depression is whenever I grew up, got to be in my late teens, around 15, 16, somewhere along there, just at the beginning of the war. I said to my dad, I said, I had to wear patches in my pants. My mother would patch my overalls, and that's embarrassing to wear those patched overalls. And I said to my daddy, I said, why do I have to wear these patched overalls? Why can't I have decent overalls to wear to school? Remember one thing, and this has stuck with me all my life. We was in the horse lot getting ready to, was harnessing the horses, getting ready to go to the field. And my daddy said to me, he said, son, he said, Dad will never be able to give you much. He said, but he said, and also in that was that I had to wear those patch things to church. And Daddy said to me, he said, son, well, I hate it. I wish I could do better. But he said, there's one thing that I can do. He said, if I can get the word of God in you, he said, that'll be something nobody can ever take away. I remember that vividly.
What I remember was about the commodities that we received, and his family received commodities too. And I remember, I don't know what all was in that.
Mostly cheese.
And eggs. We got eggs.
Yeah, we got
And the reason I remember the eggs so well, my brother Wilbur, he was holding up that bag of eggs and the bottom come out of it. There went all those eggs on the floor. And I remember that very well. I'm sure we had hens and was getting eggs, but that was part of the issue whenever you went to get them was eggs and cheese and probably beans.
We got wheat.
I can't. Of course, some of the things I'm sure Daddy didn't take.
We got, they rang wheat at the Chico Glen, you know, where the old road used to go to Jacksboro. And the government would send those train loads of wheat, and we could go and fill up as many bags as a whole car, and you kind of got them on first come first serve. And I know me and Dad would go over there, and I'd hold a sack, and Dad would fill them up, and we'd get all we could get on the little old back end of the car that he had. I don't know if it was a Model T or no. It was a Chevrolet, I guess. Anyway, we got it. No, he had an old trailer, and the thing you'd pull it and it'd go like this. But I remember getting that wheat, and we fed it to hogs. So we always had plenty of milk. We had plenty of pork and plenty of chicken.
See, our parents butchered their own hogs and calves. And the hog meat, my daddy had a big old box like this where he would salt it down in that salt, and that kept it, that preserved it. And then whenever it got cured out, well, then they would hang it. But and a lot of times, if Daddy killed a beef, he would peddle it out, sell some of it to the
My
neighbors.
dad did that.
That'd give us a little extra money, and we still had beef.
Maxine actually wanted to know this one. What did y'all do to entertain yourselves when you were younger? Y'all didn't have, you know, the internet and all of this stuff, video games. So what did you do?
Well, I worked in the field from sun up till about 5 o'clock. When the sun began to go down, we went home. We went to the house. We had what you call a staff and wheel. And I need to make one and show you kids. I've got the wheel that we played with as a kid. And we'd run up and down the road with that staff and wheel till it got dark. And that's about all we had to play with, really, because we had no bicycles.
We'd play hide and seek.
Yeah, hide and seek.
And you just entertained yourself. Most of the time we got through working, we was tired. And I had a horse, and every minute that I had, I'd be training that horse, be fooling with it.
Another thing we used to do is catch those, what was those bugs?
Lightning bugs.
Lightning bugs. You don't know what a lightning bug is. It had a light on his butt end. And we'd catch those, and then we'd smear it on our clothes, and it would glitter.
We'd catch them and put them in a jar, and there's so many of them, it'd light up around the jar.
Yeah, you don't ever see anything like that anymore.
I wonder what went with those. Yeah. When we grew up out here west of town, the sky at night was just full of them. And then the crickets would be, you'd just sing and
hear the bullfrogs.
Yeah, hear the little old frogs croaking. And it was, no, y'all couldn't figure out what. No, we had no games. There wasn't any games.
Well, we had dominoes.
Well, yeah, we had dominoes. Daddy would not let us. He wouldn't let us play cards.
No, Mama wouldn't either.
I mean,
we didn't go to the movies on Sunday either.
Oh no, you didn't go. Dad, Dad wouldn't let me rope on Sunday afternoon. Sunday was the Lord's Day, and I mean that
we
was.
Never worked. Of course, you had to milk the cows and those things that you do every day, but we never worked on Sunday. Never.
And we went to church, and we didn't go on Wednesday night.
No, there was no Wednesday night service.
Well, I think there was here, but we didn't. But we went on Sunday morning, Sunday night. We didn't. We didn't miss. There was no question about it. we went to church, and we were taught respect for our elders, and we were taught respect. Man, a preacher was absolutely, he could do no wrong.
You trusted your pastor.
But you could trust them. We didn't have this kind of stuff so much that we have today. And preachers running off with money or running off with another woman or whatever. But the thing is, the scripture says in the book of Deuteronomy, it said to honor your father and mother, that you might have long life upon the earth. And then it says that we're to teach our children to teach their children, and then you're to teach your children, and your children will teach your children. That's the way we were. That's the way we were taught.
I tell you what, my daddy, I can never remember him whipping but once, but he had steel blue eyes, and they pierced you. He would look at you with those eyes. You're going to do what Daddy said. You knew you better do what Daddy said, because they were very piercing. Beautiful eyes, didn't he? He had big, pretty eyes, but they were very piercing.
Okay, I have 4 questions left, and then I guess if anybody else has anything they wanted to ask. So, how long have y'all been married?
68 years.
68 years. So a couple of years, y'all had 70 years of marriage. Which is pretty unbelievable.
If I don't knock him in the head first.
So what would you say is the key to a good marriage, a happy marriage? What would you say?
Well, I would say respect each other. And it's no need of all that quarreling and going on. It's just
love.
You can settle things without really bickering and getting so angry.
Respect, and your papa, I would not fuss.
Well, his mother and daddy fussed a lot, and he vowed that he'd not have a home like that. And of course, we've had our up and downs. Not no home that exists that doesn't have some problems, but they don't have to be.
We just
destructive.
never did. The word divorce never came up. My daddy told me this whenever I went to get Granny. He said, "Son, you know what you're doing?" He said, "This is not on a trial basis." He said, "This is from now on." And and of course, when you're in love, love covers a multitude of sin. That's what Solomon said. And, that you got a pattern, you got the recipe in the Word of God. If we respect each other, always be truthful, never leave anything or do anything that would cause the other one not to trust you. Because, see, a loss of trust is a terrible thing to ever gain back. So I would say that ours, we've always prayed together. We still do. We read the Bible together. And just in general, we love each other. And I couldn't imagine not having her around. And,
no, I can't imagine him not having me.
You don't look for faults, you look for the good things. because all of us got faults. If you start picking at someone's fault, you're headed for trouble. Because it's not what can you do for me, but what can I do for her to make her happy?
Take me shopping.
And oh man, I guess if there's one thing, Granny's addicted to shopping.
I hadn't shopped since we moved in Decatur, hardly.
Well, they don't want to hear that.
No.
Yes.
You don't want to tell. You don't want to know how miserable I've been, cause.
Well, that's up to you. I mean,
Cause I haven't got to go shopping. Might not buy anything, but it's good to go and look. Good to go and look.
Two, I guess, yeah, really two more because one of kind of the same. What is your advice to others in your family and friends that you may have? You know, y'all made it this far. What advice would you give to someone about just how to live their life? And
well, my advice would be put the Lord first. See, whenever the Lord's first in our life, the more we'll become like Him. Not that we'll be perfect, but if we put Him first, then everything else is going to follow. Because here's what will happen. If we put the Lord first in our life, then your companion is going to learn that you would never do anything purposely to harm her or the children. I think that is the first advice. Always consider the other one. Don't live a selfish. See, selfishness is a terrible, terrible thing. And two, another thing I would advise you, whenever there will be two minds, one is going to run in one direction or another. So whenever you put two minds together and you're able to talk without fighting, without screaming, well, then you can put them together. I know there's been things that's come up in our life, and I thought that it might be the right thing, but Granny has put her input in it, and I prayed about it, thought about it, and turned out when you put both ideas together, why you've got a combination.
One time, I used to be really bad about pouting. And there was something I got mad at him about. I didn't even speak to him for 3 days. He come in from the office one day and he said, well, let's have it. Get it off your chest. And when I started in, I think he wished he hadn't said that. I don't remember what it was, do you?
Yeah, she'd pout. Oh, I told her, I said, don't give me the silent treatment. And I don't know what it was about. Something didn't work. Well, you see, whenever you get where we are now, those kind of, all the stuff that you would think was so important, it's unimportant.
Okay, I think this is pretty much kind of my final question, but how, as y'all get closer to, you know, eternity and being with the Lord, you know, how do you want to be remembered? How do you want the family to remember y'all after y'all are gone?
Well, just like we're real people. Mother and Daddy, Granny and Pawpaw. And that we loved you all. And we shared that love, showed it.
Well, I'd like to be remembered
as good soldiers.
I'd like to be remembered as one who loved the Lord, loved you, love my family, and I love souls. When you kids walk by and look on Papa's cold farm, I hope you'll be able to say, he really loved me, he prayed for me, and he loved the Lord. Yeah, I've often said if the boys, when they look on us, if they can just say that that's the way my dad was, it'd be
What you saw is what you got.
That's right. And you understand that we're nearing the end of our journey. It's been a wonderful one. It's been a joyful one. I said a moment ago, I don't know of anything that I would change. I'm perfectly content. I'm happy. I don't want nothing. I hate that these legs has caught me as they have, but there's got to be something bring me down. And so
I tell him just be grateful. He can still get around.
And so that's time. Life is short.
At the longest.
At the longest, it seems so short. We often talk about it. See, we married in 1945, and that's a couple more years, as you said, it'll be 70 years. And but it seems so short. And the circumstances that surround you, that you have no control over. But I guess that's the way I'd love to be remembered, that I was not a selfish person.
Selfish with me, weren't you?
I didn't know it if I would.
Oh, I thought I'd get something out of it.
Well, this is so I guess that's about it. Whenever, I hope y'all will rejoice and don't weep. You'll shed tears probably, but just think about what I'll be doing.
Are you looking forward to it?
Yes.
Both of y'all?
Not homesick.
I look forward to being out of this old body with this pain and all of that.
But we still enjoy life.
No, we want to stay here as long as we can. Like she said, we're not real homesick for heaven because
We're just selfish enough to want to stay around a little bit longer.
We're enjoying life. We want to stay a little longer. I'd like to preach a few more times.
You know what? He thought he couldn't preach, but Sunday night, he said, I know how the short message. So help me, he preached at least 45 minutes. And that's a no-no, didn't you?
Well,
Yes,
that's my business. I do the preaching, see. And
yes, but I have to sit back there and
well,
screw that seat.
get up and leave. That's about the best thing I know you can do. See, the Holy Spirit, this is what a lot of, now if you're not saying anything, and if you get to repeating yourself, well then it's time to quit. But whenever the Spirit of God, I was preaching from 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And that's a tremendous chapter. It tells us how to live, what motivated Paul. He's motivated by his salvation. He's motivated by the fact that in verse 10 it said you're going to have to stand before the Lord, going to face the judgments appointed unto man. And in verse 11 it said, knowing the terror of the Lord, hell was real to him. And in verse number 20, I believe it is, he said, the love of Christ constraineth us. And down on in verse 20, it said, we're ambassadors. That's our responsibility. And then I went back to the first of the chapter where Paul said that we know that if this earthly house be dissolved, we have a building not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And so he went ahead to say, desire not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be clothed with the righteousness of the Lord. See, this old flesh will drop off, and we'll have a new body fashioned. 1 John 3 said, we know not what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. So that's the hope. And that's what I was preaching on. And you get, man, that stuff that's some real stuff right in there.
Well, when he gets to saying, like the third point, and he repeats the third point several times, you know you're in trouble. Let me tell you something real funny about your daddy and Uncle Curtis. This was when we was in Dumas, and I was in the choir, and the boys, I'd always have them sitting on the front seat there. And anyway, back then they wore the penny loafers. You ever seen them where they put the pennies in there? Kind of like the shoes made like this. There's a slit there, and you could put a penny in there. Well, your daddy was sitting there swinging his foot, swung his shoe off, and was trying to make Uncle Curtis go get it. Well, he wouldn't do it. So they got in a fight right there on the front seat in the church. Instead of Pawpaw doing what he ought to have done, he turned to me and he said, Miss Bain, your boys need some attention. My boys need some attention. So I come down out of the choir, go get them, one in each hand, go back to my regular seat, sit down. I knew better than to go outside.
I think your daddy told you what they was fighting over, didn't he?
Well, after he got in college.
Yeah.
He come in from college one day and he said, Mother, you know what Curtis and I were fighting about that day? And I said, I have no idea. He said, I kicked my shoe off and I was trying to make Curtis go get it. I said, Glenn, I ought to whip you yet. But they were the best little boys ever. My regular pew and sat down. And another thing, they would get one on each side where they'd lay down on the seat. I just occupied the whole seat. And they'd laid in my lap. One time would put his head here and the other one out here. No problem. But the next time they rotated, and they didn't forget either, where one's head up here by Mama's belly, and the other one out here. Next time, the other one had his head up here, the other one out here. And it was that way as long as...
You know, there wasn't a 16 months difference in your dad and Uncle Curtis.
So I've always had them by myself during the church service. But the only time, let's see, we went to Duncan, Oklahoma, tryout for church. Well, it rained. And we'd gone out to one of the members' house, and I had a coat. It was cold, and it had gathers around it, a big tail coat. When I got back in the car to go to church, I didn't get all that coattail in, so I had a wet coattail. Well, got into church, and they just had slat seats, where it'd be about this much difference, in the last slat in the seat. Well, Glenn got down on the floor, crawling under the seat, and I was trying to get him. I was holding Curtis in my lap because I couldn't lay him down. Well, a woman across over here, she come over and she said, "Can I help you?" Well, I handed her Curtis because I knew not to let her touch your daddy. It would have been nobody touched him but us. Nobody. I mean, he was just, so I knew that not to let her try to get him from under that seat.
He's crawling under those seats.
He was having fun. And here Papa was up there trying to preach in view of a call. And they called us. That was a mistake.
Well, that's pretty much all I had. Just thank y'all so much for taking time and sharing all of this stuff with us. I know I appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of other folks will as well. So thank y'all for your time.
Thank you. It's been good for us. We kind of reminisce over old times, didn't we, hon?
Yeah.
Hadn't even thought about what happened back yonder during the Depression and those things. You didn't hear me telling about buying cigarettes, did you?
Who?
Me.
You buying cigarettes?
I bought cigarettes back during the war. Now, I never smoked. Never smoked. And anyway, back during the war, and they were rationed. Well, you had to stand in line to buy cigarettes, and you were just allowed so many packages because the cigarettes was going to the military. I mean, they were first, and rightfully so. And so various ones would want me to buy cigarettes for them. They gave me the money. It was their cigarettes. But I stood in line and bought cigarettes for various ones. But I never smoked. Never smoked.
All right.
Granny, are you ready?
Yep.
Well, this is an incident that happened in our very first church, early in our ministry. Granny had gone to the grocery store, and there was a couple that called and wanted to get married. Well, I knew it would be $5. And man, $5 in was great. Well, I don't know how I got in touch with her. We didn't have cell phones then, but anyway, somehow I got the word to her, and she just kept us staying, never did come. So whenever she come, I was hot in the collar. So with this house that we were living in was an old converted barrack, and some of the front porch had rotted. Well, I come storming out of the house, and my leg went through that. I was hanging. I've got, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a white spot right there on that nail where I hit the ground with it. And I just hanging up there. Well, she's standing there laughing at me. And probably it was, I don't know.
Yeah,
but I thought, how stupid that I was. What kind of a shape was I in when I got to where I was going to perform the wedding ceremony? All I was thinking about at that time was that $5. Because that would buy our groceries for a week. And anyway, I guess I didn't leave anything out on that
No,
one.
you did good. Another funny incident. He had an ingrowing toenail. They didn't take it all out. They just took about half of it. Well, we were in walking distance of the hospital, and he went over there by himself. He drove over there, and they called me. I had to come get the car, so I walked over there. Anyway, we got home, and of course they had given him what they used to call a yellow jacket to make him not care. He got home and he was just going on about those pretty nurses. Oh, I wish you could have seen them. They were so pretty. It wasn't long till the feeling come back in his toe, and he forgot about those pretty nurses. And that was so funny. Another time, I guess he had to have it completely taken off. And another time, we moved to another house. Anyway, he was over in the corner, and he had got on that toe.
He lanced it for me.
He got on the toe, and here Papa was dancing up and down. I'll whip you. And Ron got behind me, and I said, no, you're not going to whip him. You're not going to touch him. He didn't. But he lanced that toe, got well after that. I told him I said that's all it needed was a good lesson.
Boy, he mashed that thing and the proud flesh and it just,
Oh, when I was pregnant with Curtis, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we was living in that house, and anyway, even though I was pregnant, I
probably
was
Glenn.
no, I don't remember one of the boys.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had done something that made one of them cry or something. I don't know what it was. Anyway, Ed run from me. Knowing I was big, he didn't think that Mother could run. Here I was out there chasing that kid around that house. Here I was great big. And he laughed at me. He said, "You look funny out there," but I caught him anyway.
Oh, when you're young, you'll do things. You look back and you say, my goodness, what did I do that for?
Well, whenever for Uncle Ed was born, he was milking cows for his brother-in-law's daddy, and that we had an outside toilet. Well, the lady of the house, Miss Atkins, she would always be sitting where she could see what's going on up there at the hill where we live. And she told me one day, said, "It's so funny to watch you," said, "you'd walk to the toilet and run back." Always run back to the house. Why I did, I don't know what I did.
All right.